Well, Bluey, it's nice to see you. Thank you for dropping into my little shed in the garden.
Thank you for inviting me.
I've forgotten why I invited. No, you invited me, Bluey.
Yeah, that's true.
Can you remember why?
It's to do with me wanting to kind of chat with you, but taking the opportunity because of this new release.
You mean this?
The box set.
On here it says One Love, and you signed it. And I've signed it as well, and it says More Love.
Always outdoing me, Robbie.
Teasing you, I think.
Yes.
Go on then, ask me a question.
So I'm glad that you got the box set. And did you know about it before it got sent to you?
Before it appeared? Yeah, of course I did. And I knew there was going to be a box set. And so without bothering you, I was bothering everybody else to make sure I got one really quickly. And as a special offer to me, it arrived very slowly. And I really appreciate that. It made my day.
I'm glad.
But you see, the trouble with it, I mean, look at it, for goodness sake. 102 tracks. It was so heavy, they sent 8 postmen to deliver it to me, and they sort of brought it in on a stretcher. But you needed a crane to get this into your home. There's so many CDs on it.
Oh, I'm glad they went through all the trouble and got it to you.
It's worth it.
For me, the reason why, when they said you should get somebody to interview you about, your career, because it's more about the whole, rather than just this box set, but which represents my career. Well, I thought if somebody's going to speak to me, they better know at least been there and been present during that period, and not just because of the records that I've made, but because of the music that surrounded us. And for me, along with Chris Hill and yourself, has been a person that was a messenger. Your radio stations, I would listen to it when you were actually presenting your radio shows. You'd be playing all this music that was opening me and feeding my soul with all this music that I didn't know. But also, it was about information. And it's funny because I'm now sitting with you and talking to you. It makes sense because you're where you started your career.
Yeah, with a journalistic background.
Yeah.
Yeah, the journalistic background definitely helps because it's about interviewing, it's about getting the best from people, and that applies to everybody, whether it be someone who's skilled at driving, a lorry or a pilot, because everyone has a skill, and they don't really appreciate the fact they have a skill.
Yeah.
So it's, as an interviewer, it's your job, I think, to get the very best from them and maybe look at what they do in a different way. And certainly with musicians, they seem to respond, in my experience, to non-musical questions. And a good example was Sly Stone.
Yeah.
And they brought him to the UK, and I'll never forget this. And they put him on a throne and sort of dressed him up. And I'm trying to remember it a bit like a king.
Yeah.
And, then there were these assorted media people at his feet. And I thought this was brilliant. I loved it. I thought, what a load of rubbish. But it was just so wonderful and so cheesy.
Knowing Sly, he loved it.
Well, I don't know if he was on our planet, but I think he was that day, actually. And we ended up, for some reason, talking about the difference between the loos in America and the loos in the United Kingdom. Yeah. And I can never remember how we got there, but it opened him up. And I think it was about design or something like that. And, that's a bit of an extreme example because Sly Stone is an extreme person. To put it mildly. Right. And Bobby Womack does this great thing about ringing Sly Stone up. And Bobby, as you know, is one of the biggest liars in the world, but he tells great stories. This one I believe. And Sly Stone would pick up a phone, but he'd never say anything. And Bobby used to say to him, "I know it's you, Sly." He said, "I can hear you breathing." and in talking to people like Bobby, you get sort of those non-musical stories from him.
This is it, they immediately open their world, and you realise why you like them so much.
Yeah.
is because they lived their life.
Yeah.
And you, in talking to them, you realise just how much life they've lived.
Indeed.
Yeah.
And share that that life as well. And Bobby is, I mention him whenever I can. He's one of the greatest storytellers I've ever come across. Story as in lyre, tease, and all the rest of it. But lyrically, look at it, just look at his lyrics. And of course,
unbeknown to him, a giant mentor.
What you mustn't forget, Bluey, is that I used to be really pleased when an Incognito track turned up, and I watched Light of the World develop. I saw the arrival of Loose Ends, David Grant. The list goes on. That whole area of British originated music, and it was such an exciting time. But I feel honoured to have been able to play that stuff. You didn't hear it anywhere else. Pirate radio stations, they saw this huge gap.
That's right.
And when I started doing a music show on Radio London, it was because there was an outbreak of stomach problems, and there were very few broadcasters left able to sit in a studio, and I escaped this and ended up doing a music programme, and indeed that's how the phone-in show started as well. There was nobody else around. I was very lucky. But I started off playing the likes of T-Rex and all the ordinary stuff that was around. And I thought, being on, which was Radio London at the time, and it still is, I thought there's no point. There's no point. I mean, nicking Roscoe's exclusives and playing them within sort of 30 seconds of him having played an exclusive, because I recorded it and played it. And I enjoyed doing that. But then I thought there was absolutely no point, because there was this huge raft of music. And I think that people also have to remember that your music on the radio listening possibilities were pretty slim.
That's right.
And I felt a responsibility, certainly, to do my best to give as much exposure as I could to
British
likes. Here comes the Incognito, here comes the Light of the World.
I remember that. And
does that make sense?
That did make sense to us.
I didn't know you listened,
Oh, no.
Is that why you're so successful?
It's got to be, isn't it, Robbie? But, we didn't realise the importance of how our growth would be, that radio would be a part of it, because we grew up in a society where there was pop music being played on the radio, but the kind of music we were playing was rarely on the radio. We would be going to clubs. Now and again, a band would like the average white band would kind of break through with a single like Pick Up the Pieces, and it would be on the radio and would be loving it. I never thought that when I recorded with Light of the World, in the first band that I was in, that, we would get radio plays, and we got very little radio plays. And then I did Incognito as an offshot with Tubbs, the bass player from the band, and we actually got some radio play because Radio 1 was playing it up to the news, because they had this little instrumental piece that didn't have any vocals, and it wouldn't interfere if they faded it at any time. So if they had like 20 seconds, or maybe sometimes I got up to like a minute and a half, and it was being played, and it charted for that reason. So that's when I started to appreciate the fact that we had to get our stuff on radio, and people like yourself championing our cause, as British jazz funk bands and people in soul. We were not only did we feel like we were a minority in music and suddenly getting some exposure, but we also felt that this was our chance to branch out and really push ourselves as bands, because you get promotion which you never thought you'd have, and suddenly it's a reality. And then you start thinking, I wonder if we'll get any television, and then you'd appear on Top of the Pops, and people would be thinking, wow,
I think also that it's really important to remember, and I don't think this is probably talked about enough, is that in talking to Berry Gordy, the founder of Motown, we went back over this, and I reminded him of it. we were talking about how likes of Marvin Gaye and the touring Motown bands down south in America would get shot at, for goodness sake. And because you were black, you couldn't get into certain hotels. You know, this is like in our lifetime. This isn't like in Civil War time in America. And it reminded me that with the marketing of music, it was so bad. He didn't put pictures of people on the singles they released because they had black faces.
Yeah.
And talking about that now in the real world, it's just awful. And if you then progress that to the difficulty bands like Incognito had to get exposure,
Yes.
if you put the two together, they're not too far apart, you know?
No.
And so that whole movement was just so healthy. That whole movement where they came, and you talked about a minority, but that was in the clubs.
Yeah.
In the clubs, that minority was a proper family.
Yeah.
It was a proper family.
Yeah.
And I actually liked playing recorded music to them.
This is it, and that was. I often refer, you know, when I get interviewed about the movement that we had back then, I often have to remind them that it was the clubs, it was the DJs, it was the musicians, it was the dancers. We were like a united. We were a family. And when we said we were a family, we were a family.
Yes.
And that was the movement that we came out of, and the importance. I'm so glad you kind of brought that out, because everything that led to us talking about this box set as its roots in breaking ground, you know, in breaking ground in this country and bringing diversity and our music, and this music that we'd kind of borrowed from America, this black music that we'd been listening to, and we thought we were making, and being given the opportunity to make our own version, and then realizing
it was British-fied. It was British-fied.
Yeah.
It wasn't copying on America. It was influenced by America.
Yeah.
And also we mustn't forget that slices of it went to America.
Yeah.
And America liked it
and kind of got influenced by it and turned it around. Yeah.
And more of a two-way street.
Yeah. And those changes that were happening and the their influence on us and our influence on them, and also, you know, our scene was the first time black kids and white kids were kind of together all the time in the clubs. Our scene was like, it did, you know, there had been a little bit of it with the mods, there had been a little bit of it in the reggae world, but it's like that scene, that Brit funk scene was the first time it was celebrated up and down the country, you know, because, and to me that, it made me the kind of person that could make the kind of records I'm making, because I wasn't thinking within limitations. The doors were open. I could call up people from America. I could call up, you know, and I was it made us bold, you know, and the music reflected that.
Yeah, and you know, with pop music, it had to be, you had to have a budget, you had to be pretty, you had to be a certain rhythm, and popular music like that was a skill and had a place.
That's right.
But it certainly held back the development of what people like you were doing. But I think that probably made it a bit more exciting. I mean, I always used to tease and joke on the show about funk missionary work.
Yeah.
And that was taken on board by those in the clubs, because they then thought, yeah, we are like missionaries. We are like different, and this is very special to us. Does that make sense?
Great things come out of struggle.
Yeah.
You know, there's always a light that comes through, because when we champion something, you know, there is that journey of championing something. But then when you win, when you get a little break and you know, people, your record is out, that's a win. You know, we never thought to go in a studio, for me to be in a studio, till to this day, I go in there like with reverence. You know, I'm in a studio, I've seen pictures, you know, and whether it be pictures of of Motown or the Beatles, you know, people in a recording studio, you know, with those knobs and the desks, you know, suddenly, and my opportunity to be in a room and smell the wood and the music, smell the music that's been made in there, and kind of like it's on the walls, you know, and everything you touch, you know, I still get that vibration when I walk in. Oh,
still.
Robbie,
I know exactly what you're talking about.
Even my own studio that I built, I walk in there and I sit in there. Sometimes I go in there an hour before anybody, and I just sit and just look around.
Because you see, the other question, I want to ask you a question now, because one of the things I say to people is, I don't think Bluey ever sleeps. he has so many projects on the go, he writes so much stuff. Do you not sleep? Do you just write? I mean, while we're sitting here, have you got some lyrics in your head?
Yes. Yes, because we talked, and we're in a place where it's inspiring. One of the reasons why I have a big output of songs and production is because I didn't learn to be just a guitarist that had to learn just the guitar chops and becoming like the baddest guitarist. Because I spent my time not being particularly brilliant at anything. I just loved music so much. So I wanted to grab a little piece of this, grab a little piece of that. So therefore, I'm always writing, producing, turning this, creating an instrument, getting a sound, being excited about hearing something, still in touch with my record collection. My record collection is still the main source of inspiration, you know, and I'm still finding old tracks that were released within my lifetime that I was aware of.
You sound a bit like me. I get a genuine thrill of finding a great track, and I can't wait to play it. That has never gone away.
It will never, and it won't.
No, I literally. I mean, I went to get. I took a break of 7 years for a variety of reasons. In fact, I went to get Jeff Young a coffee and didn't go back for 7 years. So he never got his coffee. No, I bought him lunch the other day. And coming back after a break, there was this whole raft of music, and I call it While I Was Away, and catch up with it. And that thrill is something, and I think it's possibly, I don't know, I'm trying to think of what you can compare it to. I don't know, it's about birth, I suppose. That's one thing, isn't it? Like something growing, coming alive.
It is, and birth and rebirth. You know, that's the thing. It's never, it doesn't stop, it doesn't stand still, and it's all related. We were talking about how at this moment there's so much great jazz music and so much amazing funk and soul, but more so than ever before. You know, it's the things we go through. It's the pandemic. It's discovering each other online. It's reading old books. It's discovery. It's people ordering stuff during the pandemic, ordering albums. Vinyl sales are higher than ever before.
But also I think that the writers and musicians, the pandemic, as awful as it is, and this historically will be seen to be one of the worst periods genuinely looked at, like at school we all learn about the plague, and it'll be looked at as we look back historically like something like that. But what it has done, I think it's brought creativity, emotion. It's almost woken up this whole generation of writers, made existing writers and musicians think differently, and there's a lot more emotion in music. And you know, one of the things, and we mentioned it earlier on when we went for a walk in the gardens, and not a music garden, by the way, but I could change that, was the use of strings. And I played a track today, and there's this whole orchestra in there. And there's this soul singer in there. And it's this lovely percussion track all in there.
This is it.
This is great.
This is it. This is the thing that, I mean, that's the story of Incognito, and that's just the story of the pandemic was just an accentuation on that whole story. During that period, I'd go for a walk in the park with Giles Peterson, who was one of your disciples, who kind of like came through, like listening to people like Chris Hill, yourself, and Jeff Young, and emulating that and being part of that, and now part of that family.
Look at him now.
Part of that family.
Yeah, you know. So,
but
yeah.
I would sit in the park, talk to him, and some of the, he would say, let's go in the studio, and we formed the band Strata in that period, and him curating this box set was from that period. Those two things would not have been done. He's a friend of mine, and I'm, in the pandemic, he allowed me to have a little radio show on his format with the whole Brownswood and Worldwide FM. So I did that, and that opened doors to me being a DJ on Apple, only because people became visible during the pandemic, because suddenly we were united through talking each other online, and it just opened
almost been, but visibility appeared from not being visible.
Yeah,
it's a very strange collision, isn't it?
Strange condition. There I was not gigging, but getting more work than ever. Speaking to people.
Why are you visible? Well, because I was invisible, and we were at home, weren't we?
Yeah, we were.
Yeah, apart obviously with technology, it does make it a little bit.
Yeah, it did. I mean, like that changed. That was a game changer. And part of this box set is
40 years and still grooving.
And
I'm gonna do a box set. It's gonna be 60 years and still grooving, and I'll get you to sign it. Okay, and you'll put more love on it, right?
Yeah.
And I'll put more love.
More love. Speaking of strings, when you mentioned that, it just came flooding back. On this record, there are tracks with Incognito with strings. Now we grew up with that whole Philadelphia, the MFSB Orchestra and the Barry White. It's like, but now they're making like darker tracks, more spiritual stuff within the strings. But a lot of us that grew up with this music, especially musicians, I'll tell you, there is certain things that have become a pinnacle that you aim for. Traveling to Japan and playing concerts, being able to be on a stage with a bigger audience than your pub crowd. It's like suddenly just traveling, getting on a tour bus, the tour bus arriving, and everybody getting on a sleeper bus. These are pinnacles, and one of them is recording strings. Being in a place, and I remember my first time on 100 Degrees and Rising, and we have a couple of tracks from that on this box set, and it made me, obviously I was listening to all the tracks and compiling. It brought back that moment that I walked into Abbey Road, and we were in the same studio as the Beatles, where I've seen the pictures, and it was the same room.
They weren't still there, though, were they?
They were
40 years. I thought 400. No, it's 40.
They were ghostly present, brother.
Yeah,
they were ghostly present because of the way that we embrace music. Their presence was there. I could feel it. I could, the sound of that room. That's when I really, truly, for the first time in my life, recognized the fact that your surroundings are really relevant to how something sounds. Because suddenly the guys were tuning up, and I've heard violins being tuned up in various rooms, but violins and cellos being tuned up in that room, and that was my first big session with a big orchestra, not just 4 or 5 people. I'd recorded 4 or 5. But I'd never been in a room with like 22 and then 11 people, it's like even at the smallest, it was like 11 or 12. And they started to play, and remember, they started to play without you hearing the track. They're running it through. And I'm hearing the arrangement for the first time. I've discussed it with the arranger, but now the arranger, Simon Hale, young guy, who would later go on to do Jamiroquai and Bjork and various people, but this was his first. And as he ran them through the tracks, the sound of the instruments and the walls and the way that the atmosphere was moving in the room, brother, I was just brought to tears. And I'm feeling right now, and I feel like crying, bro. It was just massive in my life. And so I'm so glad you brought up that whole thing, because what really pleases me is beyond the fact that it's a struggle for people to raise money and make things happen. People are finding ways to use orchestras and using people who've put years of practice and talent and to be able to write and arrange, but thinking more deeply than ever. A younger generation are bringing sounds to us. You know, I gave an award. I was at the Jazz FM Award, and I gave an award to Emma Jane Thackeray for Best Album. You know, she's playing some jazz that is deeper, and I went to see various bands recently from America and from the UK that are embracing music in a deeper way, in a spiritual way. And strings play a major role in actually, like I said, this pinnacle thing, in bringing an essence to the story that makes it stay with you, and the vibrations, you know. And so I'm so glad. Thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, Emma's a good example, actually, when you talk about spiritual, because a lot of her stuff is very spiritual. Certainly the most recent album, it's very spiritual indeed. And that was a good award to present.
And it's allowed us to kind of get together this week. We're making tunes together, so.
Are you?
Yeah.
So that's interesting. Because you see, you were talking about how the orchestra bowled you over, and it was a musical moment that will always stay in your heart. But also, orchestras are made up of people who have grown up through this Incognito period. Yeah. So they look at their musical job not just being Mahler or Beethoven. They see their musical job as being a jazz player, even a rock player, dare I say it. But,
I mean,
and because they broaden their horizons, I think that's where more of the jazz and more of the soul are able to meet each other.
That's right.
And they're understood by the classical players. Yeah. They're also understood by the jazz players.
Yeah.
Does that make any sense
of
to
course.
you?
When I listen to, and as they're moving, as the generations move, it's like when I listen to Shaka Khan and Rufus, when they use strings and they use not Klaus, they used Claire Fisher as an arranger, and then I was listening to Klaus Ogerman. And when I played Claire Fisher and Klaus Ogerman and some of these tracks, like Benson's music with strings, Shaka Khan and Rufus with music, and I played that to Simon and said, "That's what I want on this Incognito track. That's the journey, but plus where we are now, plus what I heard what I heard of your tape when to make your presentation as a string arranger that from your music college." That essence, what you're hearing from me, but include some of this journey in there, because this is where it's coming from. This is my journey. These are the forerunners, and from that, and those guys and all that Mahler and all those things ahead of me, and then in time we don't stop embracing, we don't stop learning, because there's such a wide range of music out there.
I mean, I've been back on air now since April, and I can genuinely say I'm completely, in a way, pleasantly overwhelmed by so much young, new, exciting stuff. And not just that, but looking back as well, those like The Voice of Santana's got a great album. There's a Mature Man, but he sounds so fresh, and I think this explosion of young writers, young players, has drawn out the, not the old boys, but the more mature people into doing just what you were talking about, and prepared to experiment. You know, bring in the orchestra. We can't afford it, but bring them in. Or the orchestra not being as expensive as they used to be, wanting to be involved.
And me traveling around the world prior to this pandemic, I began to understand that there's a new generation, especially in Asia, of violin players, cello players, orchestral players, and these young guys and girls just like embracing it, and not just embracing the classical world, but they're going to be really, really great because they're embracing jazz straight away. Because one of the things when we started recording in this country, I found it hard at times if somebody had been versed in the classical world to get them to kind of like be in the pocket when, you know, like when you're playing a track like putting strings on Nights Over Egypt, you know, they were just not getting inside that pocket of where it should be. But now there's because of the arranger was on top of it, and he was a young cat, and he was bringing them in, and they were like still learning, although they had this wealth that had brought them into being the guys that would be recording at Abbey Road on a regular basis. Suddenly they were still picking up new stuff, and now this generation, what with Thundercats and the Kamasi Washington and all the brilliant players that we have from this country, you know, the young people, and even like bands from Australia like Coyote, you know, and it's exciting times. It's exciting times, and I feel like, and this box set is coming out at a good time because now I'm going to go with the excitement of what's going on in these changing times, and the spirituality that is opened up to the young. And for me now, my opportunity to say, I don't really need to kind of just try to follow any one path of following my hits that I've had with Incognito. I've always tried not to do that, but sometimes it's like, look, you know, we need this, we need that. Now I'm actually in a place where this marks, here is the story. What you're going to hear next is just another story.
What interested me was having a re-look at what you grew up listening to and what you wanted to have a go at refreshing, reviewing, and Lowdown. Where did the idea come from to have Mario Biondi and one of my favourites, Chaka Khan, on the same track?
Well, I knew that I was producing Mario's album at the time, and he wanted me to introduce him to Chaka Khan. I thought I could make that happen because that's my friend, you know, and we'd been touring together, and Chaka became a friend after I did a television show with her, and she said, like, your band really did turn into Rufus that night for me. And I felt, yeah, because if I'm going to play with you, I'm not going to try to kind of, I want to play the record that I fell in love with. So we did that, and she found that really funny because she's moving on and her new players play it in a more gospel way. But she found it really interesting that we'd paid so much attention to the original. And I'm like that with all the music that I cover, whether it be a Stevie Wonder song or, in the case of Lowdown, a Boss Gags tune that I loved very much. So did you, because I know that you played it enough time on your shows.
Yeah, I'm a big Boss Gags fan.
Yeah,
I
know that.
Definitely.
So doing Lowdown again was I'd looked after Chaka during a show that I was musical director for, which she was touring with Lulu and Anastasia, and they were doing like Here Come the Girls, playing like hit songs but kind of covered by them and playing some of their own music. And I'd looked after her one day, and she said, Bluey, thank you for looking after me if you ever need me. I said, babe, you know, you're actually opening that door to me. I'm going to take you up on it. And she was true to her word, and came time to do the track. I got Mario and her to duet on it. Because I could hear the possibility of, when you hear one of the things that I'm good at is to be able to identify a song and place it with a person, whether it's something that I write or something that already exists. I knew that Mesa and Don't You Worry About a Thing. I didn't even know she had been working with Stevie Wonder, but I knew that voice, when the moment I heard it, would link. But she shocked me by telling me at the moment, or first time I spoke to her, that she had actually been there working with Stevie Wonder on Jungle Fever album. But back to Lowdown, I heard Mario's tone and Shaka Khan's tone working together when he's, not just because he wanted it to happen, but because I identified with both of them, having worked with them. And that stays in your head. If you're a songwriter and an arranger and producer, stuff stay in your head, and it could be triggered at any moment by something you hear. And I heard Lowdown, I was listening to Boz Scaggs' Lowdown, I thought, oh my God, this is the duet. And I don't really need to change this much. I just need to recreate this track. The drum pattern, the fact that it was Toto as a backing band. You know, I could get that Toto feel out of Incognito players because we grew up with that. That's part of our DNA.
But it worked.
It worked.
Yeah, it worked. What about Nights Over Egypt, which is one of my all-time favourite tunes? Why did you cover that one?
Well, again, all the covers that I've made is because I identified with the tune. I danced to it. You know, I was in the clubs. When you were spinning it, I was dancing to it. So
club culture
is a huge part of that.
Is a huge part of the legacy of Incognito.
Yeah, Chris Hill signed us. Yeah. You know, you played us. You were championing us. Giles Peterson was coming through and like gave me my first ever interview when the Jazz Funk. He was the first guy to interview me. When he came back in his garden shed
in South London.
In South London, yeah. And then when he came to doing, he heard us play Always There and Nights Over Egypt live. He thought, you got to go in the studio and record these. Every time when he did that when I did Always There, and we went in the studio, and then I did another set of gigs, and later on, having been signed to Talking Loud, he heard it and he said, like, you've got to record it, and suggested that I this time include a duet with Mesa and Jocelyn. A no-brainer. I was happy to do it. I was happy that some younger generation person was encouraging me to do what I love. And but we did struggle with that at one point because we did not know the word, what the lyrics were saying. I thought it was women followed him, and Jocelyn thought maybe the same, and it didn't seem to make sense. And then Giles walked into the room and said, "Why don't we call Dexter Wansel?" You know, to have a young person that has that kind of link and that kind of love and that kind of contact, and to me that was mind blowing. So he called Dexter, got his number, called him, and Dexter was putting us right straight away. It's women Fellaheen, as in the Fellaheen women, wear veils to be seen by no one.
If you, again, going back to the heritage, and we talked about a couple of things that you covered, but with your own things, when you're writing an original tune, do you ever imagine somebody else playing it?
I don't think you ever do it with that in mind. That's always the shock and the surprise.
When somebody does.
It's always a surprise. Or when you've done it and then suddenly somebody who's actually written it comes up to you, like when I was playing in Texas somewhere, and the songwriter Paul Allen, who wrote the lyrical version of the Ronnie Laws track, he was standing at the front of the queue with his family, and the children came up to me and grabbed my legs and went, "Uncle Bluey, Uncle Bluey." And I thought, "Uncle Bluey? Thank you for our house." I said, "Thank you for our house?" They said, and the guy looked at me and tears in his eyes, and he said, "Brother, I wrote Always There." I thought, oh my goodness. And he'd stopped, he'd got a regular job, and this had re-triggered him, you know, and and there was finance coming in because it was a huge hit worldwide. And, you know, I was grateful for the song, and I was so pleased to have that kind of reaction. It truly allowed me to understand the nature of music and how it is much beyond, how it goes far beyond our intentions in doing it. You know, we get up, we play something in the morning, or we cover something, we sing something that already exists. Then we think, When we go in the studio, we record it, pleasure, loving it, doing it, going out, playing it in front of audiences, loving it, living the life, getting whatever we set out to achieve our dreams, and we're achieving it. And then suddenly realize that you've actually changed somebody's life because you've actually did this track. Oh, it's deep.
But you touched on something else earlier on, that and there's a whole CD. I think it's 102 tracks. I'm just trying about 6 at a guess, but the live
8.
in Japan 8. No, but I think the Japan one is number whatever it is in here.
The live album.
God, I sprained my wrist picking it up. Why Japan? Because of the big stadiums? Because your music, you then realise your music has spread around the world. What is it about performing in Japan that? Because when you talked about it, you got really excited.
Yeah, I was a teenager reading The Melody Maker, and I saw Traffic live in Japan and Santana, and I was a big Santana fan. And Santana came out with the Lotus, recorded at the Budokan or wherever it was recorded. Big gatefold sleeve album, loads of records in there. But the whole essence of Japan and its culture was being highlighted. And then I met the few Japanese musicians. The band called Gonzalez had a Japanese bass player for a while, and the Sadistic Mika band came over, and I stood outside the marquee and watched them, and Japanese people, and realized they were different. And it was all kind of drawing me to it. Then I read that interview in the Melody Maker, and they were talking about traveling in Japan and the culture, and going out and eating ramen, and describing the stillness in time that they experienced, or that they were having all this activity, that Japan made them see the tranquility and I knew what it was like to be. I was hanging around with, even as a child, with rock and rollers, and for them to describe that it's a different adventure, that it was fresh and it was refreshing, it was beautiful, and the way that they spoke about it, and I thought, if this is the word of Steve Winwood and he's like enthusing about it, I want to see it for myself. And it did not disappoint. It's one place in the world where the moment, and also those stuff that you guys were playing, those direct-to-discs, those Japanese imports.
Don't remind me about that.
Oh my goodness.
I'd just like to, if the burglars that took my collection are still alive.
No.
I had them, I'm not the greatest at filing stuff, so this was a file of Japanese albums on the floor, and they took the lot. And my guess is they had no idea how valuable they were to me. And lots of people in CD style have replaced some of them for me, but not all of them. That absolutely broke my heart. They didn't break into my house to steal my Japanese record collection, but that still hurts. The fact that they're welcome to the telly, I couldn't care less, but my Japanese collection. And you mustn't forget that to buy a Japanese album was the equivalent of a week's wages for some people at the time.
Listen,
they were just
it was equivalent to a month's wages for me,
and a year for some musicians.
That's right.
They were just so expensive.
That's right.
But that was another area of music, and the American footprint musically in Japan. Another fascinating story. But that was all fresh and different, and like you were describing, was a different look at the genre of music.
That's right.
Yeah, that was a sad reminder, you touching on Japan, but you did make the pace sad.
No, but hopefully the energy that we play on the live album on this box set will kind of remind you of better times, and that your connection with Japan, because even in making that live album, my friend, who sadly passed away in an accident soon afterwards, it was the A&R guy that was involved in actually having that recorded. We went to play this venue in Japan, in Tokyo, and we weren't supposed to be recording a live album. It was meant to be that we do a gig in the middle of a series of gigs that a big Japanese band were having a week of shows sold out. We slotted in their day off, but they were recording every show for them. So the rig was already up they had a mobile recording all their shows. So they had cameras, they had a whole studio outside recording multi-tracks, and we thought to ourselves, wouldn't it be fantastic if we could use this? And the guy who's, like I said, my friend who sadly passed, he just said, let's make it happen. So I took out whatever I could out of my bank account, and he went to his bank account and he did the same thing. None of us told our missus, you know, and we just, I went to my band and said, look, guys, if you can, we're going to record it. Don't charge me for it. And anyone who needs to be paid straight away, you're going to have to wait. You know, you can step off the stage if you don't want to record it, but we're recording it live. So everybody did it, and we got an album out of it. And it was released only in Japan, but finally it's out for the world to hear in this box set.
Now it's been liberated in the UK.
It's been liberated, yeah. And it's a beautiful story for me. Yeah.
You've been very loyal to Mesa, and she pops up on a lot of the tracks, and she's in fact featured on one of 2 unreleased tracks, and I wonder where they've been.
Yeah, well, the thing with Mesa is that from the moment I was introduced to her by Steve Harvey, Steve the Scotsman Harvey, who's a dear friend and a very talented producer, and he suggested my criteria was that I did not know American singers, and he'd worked with a lot of them, and he said, so what are you after? And I said, a great singer who's not a diva. And he said, well, the sweetest one is Mesa. Speak to Mesa. And the moment I spoke to her on the phone, and then that would lead, I didn't realize that she was out there working with Stevie Wonder. Did Don't You Worry About a Thing. It led to various things. There's a track on there called Feel So Good that she sings on. How that didn't make the album, I don't know, but I think we just had a glut of stuff. We just had far too many tunes, and we left it to the record company to choose. But I'm so glad that it's out, because she's flying on it, as she always does on tunes. And she will be a fixture of Incognito for as long as we're alive. And she's definitely the voice of Incognito.
Yeah, I played that track. Yeah. I like that track very much, and I just wondered at the time.
Thank you.
Why it wasn't hadn't been. And In My System, what story was that?
Well, the band The System. This was like. I'm not gravitated a lot to music in the 80s, and I was like always surprised when there's something caught my ear and my body and made me want to move in the 80s, because the 70s was my thing. And then I heard You're in My System by The System. It always stayed with me. And whilst this box set was being made, I just made a rough demo of that song with my friend Richard Bull, who was my main co-writer. But we did a lot of covers together. Don't You Worry About a Thing was one of them. But so I went to Richard and said, let's put this tune together. And then I put a vocal on it, and then we added the Incognito horns. The record company heard it, and I said, well, they liked it and they wanted it. I said, well, let me put a vocal on it. He said, no, we want it as the way it is. So it's ended up with my voice on it. And doing quite well and bringing a lot of pleasure to people, but also for me, from my point of view, because I'm such a fan of the tune, reintroducing them to the System's original. So they wrote on our website, they liked what I'd done. And
saying that, do you ever, let me tell you why I'm asking this question. Henry Mancini, of all people, I had a long chat with, and I said to him, do you ever not want to hear one of your tunes? And he said, yes. He said, I hate hearing Moon River when I'm going up in a lift.
Why Moon River?
Well, I think he felt that, music like Moon River shouldn't be in an escalator, shouldn't be in a lift. And that always stuck with me, that he'd written this very popular, big selling
Yeah.
piece, and here he is in a lift and they're playing
Yeah.
Moon River. I think he thinks that
Yeah.
there's lift music
Well-
and Henry Mancini music.
Well,
is there anywhere that you
well-
don't want to hear an Incognito tune?
No, I'm far too humble for that, and I'm far too happy to actually hear my music being played anywhere. I'd accept any lifts, any elevators, anywhere in the world, you know. And as long as it's being played, for me to actually hear my music outside of my studio, outside of my bedroom, outside of the little tree under a tree that I wrote it in a park, you know, for me to hear it in another environment and to hear people listening to it, or to have somebody to have chosen it to be in a list of songs to be played in a restaurant and it comes on, it's a chuckle, it's a little heartbeat, it's funny, it's playful.
So when I play one, you're pleased to hear it then?
Very. Super happy. Even prepared to take you out for a meal because of it.
Yeah, a lunch.
A lunch.
A lunch, yeah. Somewhere that closes early.
Okay. For me too. Robbie, thank you very much, my friend. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me. And it was an opportunity for me to present, to have somebody question me or have a chat about this box set. But for me, it's also just pleasant, you know, to go back.
And it's my pleasure to see that you can write, because you signed this for me, and this precious box set, and I think I'll give away as a very special prize on my Sunday show on Jazz FM. Can I do that?
Please do. We've signed it, so somebody's getting a signed copy. That's my first signed copy.
And I hope your only signed copy.
Yes. Thank you.